stepping out and speaking up against Western sanctions. It's one of the world's poorest countries with the highest inflation rate. But is introducing a new currency the solution, or just throwing good money after bad? I'm Imran Garda, and our newsmaker today is the currency crisis in Zimbabwe. A decade ago, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was, and yes, this is an actual number, 90 sextillion% year on year. The $100 trillion banknote in circulation at the time wouldn't even cover the cost of a one-way bus fare in the capital, Harare. And it now sells on eBay as a kind of morbid economic souvenir for as little as 99 cents. This year, inflation is hovering at around 300%. That was the latest figure before Zimbabwe's finance minister put a moratorium on publishing numbers until next year. The government blames its financial problems on sanctions imposed by the EU and US during Mugabe's reign. And now Zimbabwe is demanding they be lifted to end 2 decades of economic isolation. But some blame other factors like corruption, mismanagement, bad land reform policies, and even the reliance on digital currency. So which is it? Natalie Pohonen reports on life inside a hyperinflation nation.
This isn't your typical public holiday. Instead of commemorating a significant historical event, Zimbabwe gave everyone the day off to protest against Western sanctions. The government organised demonstrations like this one at a stadium in the capital, Harare. But it failed to draw the thousands of protesters the ruling ZANU-PF party had hoped would come. President Emmerson Mnangagwa calls the sanctions a cancer sapping the economy.
The illegal sanctions are an albatross to the development, well-being and prosperity of the people of Zimbabwe. Sanctions must go. Remove them now.
Some of his supporters share that belief.
We don't have the equipment and the drugs in our hospital because of these sanctions.
But there are others questioning who is affected the most.
I just want to know, those people, they say they are targeted. What effects are the sanctions doing to them? Or they are hurting an ordinary person like me. I'm old, I'm a pensioner, my pension can't afford to sustain me.
The US and EU first imposed sanctions during the rule of Robert Mugabe for alleged human rights abuses and electoral fraud. They say there's no broader impact on the economy as the sanctions are directed at individuals and companies. But ZANU-PF says they are behind the country's financial crisis. When Mnangagwa entered office, he promised to revive the economy. His administration asked for patience to bring change. Zimbabweans don't know how high inflation actually is because the government won't release new inflation numbers until 2020. In August, the International Monetary Fund put the figure at 300% compared to the same time last year. In October alone, the price of a loaf of bread jumped by 60%, and the government increased the cost of fuel twice. While the costs of living keep rising, living conditions are deteriorating. Even if sanctions are lifted, will it be enough to improve the economic reality of the people? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Let's go to our guest now from Harare. I'm joined by Jacob Mafume. He's the Secretary for Elections of the Movement for Democratic Change, Zimbabwe's main opposition party. Also in Harare is journalist Nigel Mugamu. He's the founder of the online news publication 263 Chat. And completing our panel is Bright Matonga. He was Zimbabwe's Deputy Information Minister with the ruling ZANU-PF party. Good to have you all on the program. Bright Matonga, the fact that this was a state-sponsored protest, the government told people go out, the sanctions are the problem, We will make it easier for you to protest against international sanctions. You even had SADC approval. And yet the numbers weren't that great. It shows you that people don't buy this story, that this is all the fault of the US, the EU, and the UK, right?
No, I don't think. I think the issue, because now we're debating about sanctions, is the impact that those demonstrations made. There are three types of sanctions. Your financial, your AGOA, and ZEDERA. So if these are not affecting the ordinary man, how come the opposition don't have access to finance? These are economic sanctions. They are illegal. They're not good for the country. They're not good for anyone. And I know people would try and talk about corruption. Look, in Europe alone, corruption amounts to about 120 billion euros. This is according to the report by the EU Commission on Corruption. So really for anyone to say that sanctions are targeted, I think it's very unfair.
It doesn't strengthen your argument a lot if I'm asking you about corruption in Zimbabwe, a country which is one of the poorest in the world, and you mention the European Union, right? Let's go to Jacob Mafume and pick up on one of the points that was made by Bright. Bright, Jacob, if the sanctions are not a problem, then you guys would have had access to capital. The MDC doesn't even have access to capital because of the sanctions. Is he right?
No, he's wrong. The same shops that one buys a Mercedes Benz is the same shop that you can buy medicines. It's the same shop that you can buy equipment for health statement. There are travel restrictions. The government of Zimbabwe has had its trade increasing with the US, its trade increasing with the EU, its trade increasing with South Africa, its trade increasing with China. So all the trade statistics have gone up. But what is said is that has gone up as well. There is accumulation. We have cars that move around. We have people living in exotic places, people getting treated in exotic hospitals. We have children learning in exotic education facilities, while Zimbabweans do not have the same access. We have inflation eroding the income. Right now, civil servants are earning $30 simply because of the creation of a fake currency called RTGS. Everybody has no money. That has not been caused by any sanction. What sanction we have is a sanction of misrule.
Right. And we're just hearing, over the past couple of hours, news had come in that state employees are going to be protesting on November the 6th because they're not being paid. Nigel Mugamu, Mugamu, sorry, apologies for the Freudian slip. Nigel Mugamu. So when the state says it's international sanctions, we've seen this movie before, right? When the state says it's the European Union, it's the Americans, it's the United Kingdom, they are the reason why we're struggling with our currency. They're the reason why we're struggling with development. Is this just an old trick by the new government copying Robert Mugabe's playbook? Or do they at least have a bit of a point here?
Look, sanctions are there. I'm sure there are effects that obviously affect the sanctions would obviously affect the country in some way. I've often spoken about the perception of Zimbabwe when it comes to sanctions and how that might affect someone doing business, especially someone doing international business. But the reality is corruption and mismanagement. If we just look at the Auditor General's annual report, it speaks very clearly, very simplistically about some of the issues within government itself, within government and parastatals. Certain things that have been going on for so long, certain parastatals that haven't been audited for a number of years, and obviously they haven't been arrested for certain individuals who've broken the law. So the ordinary citizen isn't stupid. Zimbabweans are not stupid. Many people I've spoken to, I obviously work in the media. I asked them, what they think about the anti-sanctions march last week on Friday, and they said, look, we're going to either stay home or continue, working as they normally do. And that's exactly what I did.
Right. Bright Matonga, isn't it easy to point the finger outside and more difficult to take responsibility? Because Mnangagwa and the new administration has had a couple of years now, right? So it's not to say that they can continue to use the excuse that, okay, well, we've just taken over, give us time to clean up. You've had a couple of years and things seem to be the same for ordinary Zimbabweans. Do you accept that?
No, just to get to Mr. Mugamu, he said on the issue, the point that he raised, if you are a businessman, you can't access Forex. You can't do any trade. AFOC, that is the Office of Foreign Office of America, will not allow any country to do business with Zimbabwe. So really, sanctions, if these guys are saying that there's issues of corruption, okay, remove the sanctions and then monitor the government of Zimbabwe and see what they do. You can't be saying, because really, OFAC means you can't, how about US dollars,
right, so how about
you
this?
can't do any trade.
Okay, so how about this? You answer the first part of my question a little bit later on. I'll come back to you to give you another opportunity to answer that. And let me pose this to Jacob Mafume. The point is, even though the sanctions are directed at specific individuals, very targeted towards ZANU and so on, in general, you don't get foreign direct investment in a country which is tarnished with the sanctions brush, and people can't do trade, and foreigners don't want to do trade with Zimbabwe. With that in mind, is the government right? Sanctions hurt the country.
But the statistics from the own government give a lie to that statement. They've bought cars. They're able to buy cars. They're able to buy Mercedes. They're able to trade. There has been an increased trade. There is no fruit that has been prevented to go into the EU market. There is no beef that has been prevented to go into the United States market. All the trade statistics have gone up since the time Mugabe was removed. And I'm saying that where you buy a Mercedes in Germany is the same place where you will be able to buy life-saving equipment. It's the same place where you will be able to buy medicines. So it is not an excuse to say that we are not able to progress because a few individuals are under restrictions. We are not able to progress because of endemic and pandemic corruption. We are not able to progress because of bad policy decision. Right now, we do not have a currency. We have raided foreign currency reserves. They have issued treasury bills like it's confetti at a wedding. So in such a situation where you are following a abracadabra economic policy, you are going to get economic devastation. It has nothing to do with restrictive measures. It is all to do with bad economics that do not seem to follow any law.
Okay, Jacob, you're frozen for a second. We're going to try and get you back. Bright Matonga, abracadabra. Are you believing in magic and not economics? Okay, let's take one example, right? So we have the new currency. Isn't this just another coat of paint on a crumbling wall? You can't just fix things by issuing another new currency, can you?
We are dealing with symptoms of sanctions. Before I get to that, all urban areas, Harare, Bulawayo, they are controlled by the MDC, and we hope they are not corrupt. Why can't they access Forex from the EU? Why can't they access Forex from the United States? So really, we are dealing with the symptoms of a very bad illegal system which should be lifted. Right now, these sanctions are giving ZANU-PF ammunition or the government ammunition to do whatever they want to do and blame it on sanctions. So to set a trap, remove the sanctions and see whether these guys cannot, the government of Zimbabwe or ZANU-PF, you call it, will remain the same. So Comrade Emerson Mnangagwa is doing his level best. That's why there's an audit, which is very transparent. They set up an anti-corruption commission. The people are being arrested. There are courts that deal with violence. So there is something happening. And coming to the issue of the currency, there is a shortage of, obviously there was a shortage of the bond note. So the government is going to introduce more coins, more notes to the economy. And obviously,
right. So let me ask.
Created problems for the people.
Let me ask Nigel Mugamu. Nigel, you've been speaking to people. How have they reacted to the news of the new currency?
Look, the issue of the new currency, and I quote, it's not like it's, people have obviously said it's not going to solve the problem. We've got other national issues, and I've spoken a lot about this, and people have obviously spoken about the same thing. You can introduce more notes, more coins, more this, but as long as you have some basic things like 18-hour power cuts, right, in the country, the effect of this, because obviously what that does is it eliminates the production that we need to generate in this country to generate revenue and foreign currency. So there's the issue of bringing in new notes, additional notes, or whatever you want to call it, is a small, in my view, is a small issue in a large pond. We need to fix some real fundamental issues, right? The issue of power generation right now cripples our country and our country's production levels. So so there's a lot to consider, and I keep going back to this. We can talk about, yes, sanctions. There's the effect of sanctions and so forth on the country. There's perceived high risk. So Zimbabwe is a high risk country to some investors, right? What it then does, it attracts certain kind of types of investors that may not necessarily be good for the country, may not necessarily invest in the country, and that's not what we want. We want long-term investors who obviously are going to work with us to help develop our country. So there's a number of issues here that and I don't think it's as simple as remove the sanctions and we'll be fine.
Bright, doesn't the man make a point? It is part. I mean, he's continuing Jacob's point that it's not abracadabra, right? Remove the sanctions and everything will be fine.
It's not.
What I can say to you, gentlemen, even if you were to remove ZANU-PF for President Mugabe from power and put MDC, those sanctions are not going to be removed. Believe you me. And what the Americans will do.
So why do you think they have it in for Zimbabwe? Why do you think they have it in for Zimbabwe? Why would they want to particularly punish Zimbabwe above and beyond any previous gripes?
No, the issue really is not about Zimbabweans or Zimbabwe. The issue, Zimbabwe has become a playground for the Americans, for the Russians, for the Chinese. It's about dominance. The Americans, they feel left out. They want to get involved. But the way they are doing it is they want to create chaos rather than to engage the government of Zimbabwe.
Yeah, but even the Chinese are saying, we're not going to give you money anymore. They suspended $1.3 billion in projects because they feel they can't trust the government. And this is for a massive coal station to try and solve the power crisis. So the Chinese are also saying, we're not so sure about you guys. Usually China, with zero strings attached, gets involved. They're going, perhaps we're going to keep our money in our pockets.
Because of, look, the truth of the matter, obviously, is we've not been doing things properly.
So you admit there's corruption. You admit there's corruption, right?
Of course, there is corruption everywhere. That's why the president even set up an anti-corruption commission. People are being arrested. So a lot is happening, but you have to give the man a chance. He's been in power for only 2 years. So he has to be supported. If the world is interested in a successful Zimbabwe, they have to support Zimbabwe. The picture that is being painted outside is a very wrong picture.
Yeah, but how much more time does he want?
Normal life.
Bright, how much more time does he want? He's had 2 years to try and clean up corruption, and you're saying it's still continuing.
Remove the sanctions. Ordinary people are suffering. You can't access medication. You can't access your pension. It's nothing. You can't access, you can't send your kids to a better school. You can't afford a meal because of the sanctions. You can't attract investment because of sanctions. They are illegal. Let's work together with our international partners so that Zimbabwe goes to the next level. What is happening now even is very unfortunate that some Zimbabweans see this as targeted. I am on the sanctions list, but look, I'm not affected as the ordinary man and woman in the street.
By the way,
so
Bright, why were you, as far as you understand, why were you on the sanctions list?
Oh, because I was government spokesperson. We took land, and really the issue of sanctions is about land that we took. So this is the reason why there are sanctions. So they want us to compensate, and I know what they will say. They will say pay $30 billion to the affected farmers. This is our land.
So I mean, I know you were Mugabe's spokesperson, and then you were not. And so, is it listed that because you were the spokesperson and because you took a farm from a white farmer, that's why you're particularly on the list? Is it specified exactly?
No. More than 300,000 families benefited from the land reform program. That's small-scale farmers. More than 16,000 large-scale commercial farmers, including myself, we benefited from the land reform. It is our land. That's why we went to war, and that's why we took over the land. So, but these sanctions must go. Right. They are illegal. But they are not endorsed by the United Nations.
Yeah, but you can't travel to the US, right? For example, okay, help me understand, right? Okay, I know you can't do Forex, for example. You can't travel to the United States, I'm assuming, or Europe. Is that true?
I've never applied for a visa to go to the United States.
Tell me how it personally, literally affects your life. Where has it provided a stumbling block or a ceiling?
I wouldn't put my feelings before my country. I put the feelings of the ordinary men and people that I see every day suffering, failing to access medication, failing to access clean water, failing, kids dying.
Just for clarity,
what sanctions are doing.
No, but because you mentioned it, I didn't know you were personally on the sanctions list, so I'm curious, right? How has it personally affected you in trying to raise capital or anything?
Yeah, okay, you can't send or receive United States dollars.
Okay.
You can't transact. You can't do any transaction to any outside the country. Obviously, I can do in Zimbabwe. So really, you can't do any business that requires United States dollars. You can't. Electronic transfer. Obviously, I can receive.
But that's not ordinary Zimbabweans, right? That's you as a specific member of Mugabe's previous regime on the sanctions list. So other people can do it, can't they?
Other people can do it, but in terms of foreign direct investment, you can't, because there are three forms of sanctions: financial, travel, and AGOA. That's agriculture, in a way you exchange agricultural commodities with the United States of America. The country can't do that.
Yeah, but
no one can access Forex.
Ordinary people can do it. Ordinary people
you can receive Forex from the diaspora.
Yeah, but how many,
that's for your
but my point is, like, how many people were the former spokesman of Robert Mugabe as members of ZANU-PF? 1, 2, 3. There's 50 people on a sanctions list, as far as I know, or 85 people rather, right? So you're saying the whole country is suffering, but is it really true? You can't get access to capital or Forex, but not the whole country.
There are three types of sanctions.
I know that. You've
so
said
they take you on the financial, and obviously it becomes a country risk, which means no country can do business with, no company can do business with Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe, the people that are in charge fall under that category. So these are not targeted sanctions. They are full economic sanctions, because they talk about finance, they talk about travel, they talk about trade in agriculture.
Nigel, chart a way forward for us. Where do we go from here? Because the government's adamant that the sanctions must go first for the path to be smoothed, to make reforms, to fight corruption, to grow the economy. They're adamant about this. We've heard this from Bright, we've heard this from the president. Others are saying they're wrong. So what, are we at an impasse here?
We need to come and sit and talk. We can't pretend like, that Zimbabwe is a very, very special country and that investors don't have options. I mean, they can go to Zambia, Malawi, they can go anywhere they want to go if they want to invest. We mustn't, as Zimbabweans, think that we are so special that we can easily demand sanctions must go. We must also understand why the sanctions were imposed in the first place. We also need to understand what reforms that are being required. My big brother, Bright here, was a former deputy minister in the media, and that's the sector that I'm in. One of the reforms that's being simply requested is you turn the national broadcaster into a national broadcaster and broadcast fairly and balanced and credible stuff. That's something that doesn't take a lot of resources. It's just a policy shift, right? That's required there. We've got things like IPA and POSA that are still in place, right? Yes, the train is moving, but it's not moving fast enough. And these are just examples of things that just ought to be changed. I can't see why we can't just at least meet people halfway. I can't come to your house and demand things without sitting down and having a conversation first. You know what I mean? And so I think if we want to really engage the international community, we want to be in and amongst the countries in the international space, we do need to engage with them, understand exactly what's needed, and also play ball.
Okay. Nigel, Bright, and earlier Jacob Mafume. Unfortunately, we couldn't get him back online. Maybe there was a power cut. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thanks again for joining us. Bye-bye.